Hey guys, and welcome back. I'm Rachel O'Leary, and today we're out in front of my husband's shop. You see, he's agreed to share with us his thought process and methodology of making these large aquarium stands. Now, this one we just finished today, and I'm seriously excited to have part 2 of the renovations in my fish room really nearing finality. It has been a lot of work. And if you guys didn't know it, my husband hates being on camera. So all of these projects we do together, when he appears on camera, he's not happy about it. So it's super, super special that he is willing to talk to you guys, answer some of the questions from the comments, and really just share this whole creative process with us. Now, he and I have been together for 20 years, and next week's actually our anniversary. This is basically getting all these renovations done is his gift to me. And a lot of times you guys ask down in the comments, you know, how do you get your spouse involved? How do you, make your spouse like fish? The reality is my husband doesn't like fish, but he loves me. So we do a lot of these projects together. I work on projects that he's passionate about. He helps me with the ones I'm passionate about. And we really just try and be a good team and prioritize what's important to each other. So today, this is a very long build. I probably have about 7 hours of footage that I need to wade through. So what I've decided to do is break this into a series. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of you that aren't going to want to watch all of this. But you know what? I think there's also going to be a lot of you that'll really get something out of this, even if it just gives you an idea or a technique or an application that maybe you can utilize in your own home or your own fish room. So today we're going to talk about the materials chosen, as well as how to plan for one of these stands and how to make the self-leveling feet. Let's get started, and then a big thank you to my husband for doing this with us. We are out today in my husband's shop because we are making yet another metal aquarium rack. And this will be for all of my small aquariums, my 10s and my 15s, in order to use them as a sail rack. So what I did is I measured the actual aquariums to figure out how much space we would need. It's important to always measure to the outside of the trim when you are designing these things, and then measured how much space we need in between for me to work. And Chris is going to be fabricating the rack for me out of the same material we've used in everything else, which is 1.5 inch box that is 14 gauge, and we have piles of it here, and then we've picked up some extra sticks that are out there. We accidentally bought twice as much as what we probably need, but as you guys may have noticed, there's always more projects around here. So I have very little to do with the actual construction of these stands. I mainly just measure things, figure out what I need, let my husband know, give him one of my really bad drawings, and then we look over it together to see if there's anything either one of us is missing as far as things like being able to physically fit it into the room, workability, and of course safety. And Chris knows much more about the safety side than I do. Yesterday, these are the leveling feet that Chris makes, and you can see there's this zigzaggy drawing on the table because Chris was explaining to me the strength of the weld being able to support the entire stand. I think it was each one of these bolts can hold something like 20,000 pounds or something, because I was concerned that maybe having a failure point at the bottom of a rack would be a bad idea. But as long as everything is welded very securely, these are very safe. So he's going to start today with making the leveling feet that we utilize for the stands, which is really important in my fish room, especially because the floor is not level because it's a basement floor with floor drains. So again, Chris will be utilizing a TIG process, which is argon and rod. And I'm going to be drinking coffee in the background. What exactly are the materials that you're utilizing here to make these feet?
The first thing I have is a grade 8 socket head cap screw, which is a fancy name for an Allen head bolt. It's 5/8 diameter. That. I have a large washer. I have a 1/8 inch 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 1 fits nicely on the head of the bolt, and this is simply to spread the load out more when it's on the ground and also look a little more finished. So I use a washer, I use the bolt, and I use a structural nut, which is just pretty much a fancy term for a heavy walled grade 8 nut.
Awesome.
And what I do is I take the washer this way and I just give it a couple little tack welds just to make sure it's level, even on the bottom. And nobody is ever going to see the bottom, but that's just to hold it in place. And then once it's held in place and centered, I flip it over and just weld the bolt to the washer around the whole circumference.
And then the nut you actually weld to the inside of the box pipe.
Yeah, and then the nut, you can see there's plenty of gap. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, just hold still.
But there's plenty of gap around this nut, which gives me plenty of room to get that thing welded securely. It's be very easy to fill that in with a solid weld.
Awesome, thank you.
What I'm using here, this is, as Rachel said, a TIG process, which stands for tungsten inert gas. Used to be called heliarc because they used to use helium as their inert gas. But the problem with helium is that it floats away, whereas argon kind of sinks onto what you're welding.
And it makes a very strong weld.
Oh, yes, it's very clean. I like it because it's quiet. There's no sparks. I mean, very little. It's my favorite.
Now, when we used to build the original stands, I think Chris did most of those in MIG process.
Yeah, I would do them with a MIG welder. MIG welding has its advantages. MIG welding is when you basically have people refer to it as a gun, but you pull a trigger and your filler metal, your wire, shoots out of the end of it, and it's electrified, and it basically does it for you. This process here, all this does is simply make the arc and start melting the metal, and it's the operator's responsibility to feed the wire in at the right rate. MIG welding does have its ups and does have its downs, but TIG weld is a much cleaner, stronger joint when I'm doing it. So,
Do you find that there's a lot of obstacles with welding because you have one eye?
yes. So this TIG welding, this tungsten never touches your workpiece, and a big part of welding properly is maintaining what they call arc length. So you always want your electrical arc between your workpiece and your tungsten to remain the same. That way the heat is the same, your rate of deposit is the same with your wire. Doing a good weld is mostly about consistency. It's all about consistency in your setup. So my depth perception is not very good. So what I end up doing a lot of times is dipping my tungsten, which then contaminates the tungsten, and then your arc, instead of shooting off of this nice pointed piece, it turns into a big blob at the end, and then your arc, instead of shooting down like a lightning bolt, comes out like a ball of electricity, and your arc starts to wander around from over here to over here, and then it's a mess.
So you end up having to change tungsten a lot.
I go through a lot of tungsten. Yeah, so I've seen people's comments on Rachel's videos saying things like, I'm a welder, you know, it must be nice having a welder husband. Saw a couple that said, I'm a master welder. I can assure you I'm none of those things. This is a hobby for me. I work in the power plant industry, so I work around welding all day long, but I am not a certified welder. I would have liked to have been, but after losing an eye, that will never happen for me. I simply enjoy welding. I enjoy the process. I enjoy being able to make things out of raw materials.
And really,
That's
you know,
all
you
I
took one class when we were in our early 20s.
Yeah.
And we're 41 now, and the rest has just been like giving it a shot, trying, practicing, doing, not being intimidated, learning about the process, respecting the process, and putting in the time to do it. So really, anyone who has the materials and the wherewithal can learn to do this. It's not an unattainable thing.
It's not. It's really not. It's not that hard. It's just, I mean, it's messy. You know, it's dirty. You will burn yourself.
And sometimes your wife.
Yes, if you're lucky, you will burn your wife.
This is the battle wound from the last one because I was stupid and I didn't have gloves on. And my husband only has one eye and couldn't tell that he was dragging a welding rod across my wrist.
So, I'm not a master welder. I don't want anyone to be delusioned. Sometimes I make welds that look terrible.
More often than not, they're pretty good.
Sometimes I make decent looking welds. But I've been welding long enough to know whether the weld is going to be a good weld, a strong weld. I would never...
And because of your experience in industry, in the power plant field, you have been trained in the strength of materials and fixing things and making things to last. So it's not, we're not making this up, but a lot of it is kind of intuitive.
And yeah, I'm not an engineer, so don't go by what I'm saying. I'm sure there may be someone who is a welder out there watching who may have some input, but this is a hobby for me.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So, get started. I'll do a little, couple little tack welds here.
Cool.
All I did there was just make an arc and essentially melt the washer and the bolt together. I didn't use any filler material. Didn't add any metal to it. All I wanted to do was make sure that this washer was going to stay put when I flipped it over and I was moving it around. So I just fused it together essentially. So just real quick, that's essentially what I do when I weld the bolt to the washer. Take some of this. This is a 70 series rod. It's 70,000 pounds tensile strength. It's basically the same steel that I'm welding to. So as you were to take two pieces of metal and just fuse them like I did on the bottom, you're actually melting some of this material out and melting some of this material, and you would make a crater that would be filled in. And the crater is no good, so you need to add some material on top of it and mix it all in and melt it together to make a strong weld. So
So Chris will do this, obviously, 4 times. Well, or as many feet as we're doing. And on the big rack, it was 6 feet for that one. What's nice about these is, like I said, or like I've shown you, is you can put a wrench on this and just adjust to make sure it's level front to back, side to side, and corner to corner. because again, the floor down there is not completely level. And in the past, you know, when we didn't use these leveling feet, we would have to use shims, which is fine, but this looks way nicer.
A lot easier too.
Yeah, it's a lot easier, it's way nicer, and it's easier for me to clean around, so I appreciate that as well. So here we have the 4 completed feet, at least this first phase. Those are some nice welds, honey. They look good.
Bing, bing.
And now Chris is doing what?
So I know I need 4 legs that are 57 inches long. I need 21 pieces that are going to be 28 1/4 long to support all 21 tanks. Used as cross braces, and I'm gonna need 6 pieces that are about 76.5 inches long. So my shop is not very big. It's 20 by 20. Super grateful to have it, but you know, fish rooms, garages, sheds, yards, you could always use a little more space. So I just bring in the raw material and I cut it, you know, 1 inch or so long. That way I get all my long pieces cut down a little easier to manage. So I'm just rough cutting everything to about the length I need, and then I'll fine tune everything and cut them the right length.
Awesome. One thing we saw a lot in the comments was everyone suggesting that you use the magnetic squares.
I don't like them. I mean, they're good if you're in a clean shop with not a lot of metal shards, but the magnets tend to collect a lot of filings, and I mean, this stuff's all over my shop, especially when you're cutting metal. They collect all the filings, and you're constantly trying to rub them off and keep them clean, because you'd be surprised how much a couple filings can throw off
A measurement.
your angle. And
well, and
if
Chris,
you're just trusting it, then
right. So, and Chris has also modified a bunch of his squares to take out the corner piece so that it'll actually fit around a weld so that you can double check your work. So while,
you know, if you have a weld right here, if you have 2 pieces of,
oh my god, that noise.
if you have a weld here in this corner, your square's not going to fit in there nice. So I've cut corners out. I cut this one down to make it fit inside of a small area, you know, stuff. Someone did suggest the Fireball tool squares, and they are beautiful. I would love to have some, but
So if any of you want to gift Chris that
Yes.
particular tool
No.
as a thank you for doing all this work.
No.
So we've used the same size tubing for all of my racks, no matter if they're for small aquariums or large, and that's to give a standardized appearance. But can you tell us why you chose this material from the very beginning for my tank stands?
Box tubing is incredibly strong, so a lot of structures that you see revolve around squares and triangles to be built for strength. I mean, you look at an I-beam, look at a bridge, look at pretty much any building you go to, square and triangle is what everything's based on. This 14 gauge tubing is roughly, it's roughly 1/8 of an inch thick. So it's 0.120 for the thickness. 1/8 of an inch is 0.125. It's easy to weld. It's a nice thickness to weld. It's not, like I said, I'm not an engineer. I do know what this can support though. The first big stand that I built for Rachel for her 220 downstairs,
The big boys tank.
I built that out of the same 14 gauge thickness material, but I believe I did a 2x4, 2 inch by 4 inch box tube. And as I had it written all down on paper and I had my plans drawn out, I asked a structural engineer at the company I work for if he could take a look at it. And I told him what it was hanging up, or what it was holding up, and he kind of laughed at me and said, he said, dude, this can hold up a freaking car. You don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to do any calculations here. This is super overkill.
So we scaled it back when we were building the rest of the racks. Saves us a little bit of money on the actual materials.
It looks nicer.
It looks nice. It's easy to work with, and I mean, our racks can probably literally still hold a car.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not an engineer, so if anyone is out there and knows the compressive strength of a, section of tubing, and you can get into all kinds of crazy engineering stuff, the moment based on the length and whatnot, but they're strong.
So for a 10-foot stick of this steel, it costs
anywhere from $1.50 to $2 a foot, depending on market. Steel prices change daily based on the market, so steel's a commodity.
So
it's just like food.
Yeah, so for the 7-foot rack, was that 7 feet rack that we just built?
Yeah, the one we built.
That one cost probably about
$200.
at the most $200 in materials.
In steel.
In steel.
Not counting TIG rod, not counting paint.
So, the same thing in wood would probably cost about the same, I would imagine.
I would think so.
But we really like the look of the metal. And, it's easy to paint, it's easy to touch up. And I think it looks great down there.
So, I mean, they both have their pros, both have their cons. I mean, to the average person, wood is easier, it's more accessible. It's what people have grown up working with.
Except for us.
But I've worked in power plants since I was 18, so I gravitate towards metal.
And one of the great advantages of working with metal is it's not like wood in that if you make a cut, you can't fix it. With metal, you can fix your mistakes. I mean, not like huge egregious errors, but if it's off a little bit, you can utilize the weld to compensate for that. So it's kind of nice in that regard. So the hardest part of the last build was that Chris had to do so much of the construction on my crooked basement floor. Out here in his shop, he's built this welding table that really makes life way easier for keeping things square and true. In the basement, it was a bit of a struggle, and I think we'll have to do some of that down in the basement again for this one, just because, again, it will be too big to physically fit down the stairs when it's completely assembled. But being able to have a surface like this to work on that is completely true, that he can hook clamps to. He's got his table drilled all over the place so that he can drop the clamp into the table to be able to hold the metal still. Really makes a big difference in the quality of construction. So this is all the material that is cut for fabricating the end stand result. Took Chris maybe an hour to make the feet and cut all of this, and then up next we need to figure out logistically what can be built out here and still fit into the basement. So that's the fun part.
I kind of had an idea. I don't know how I think I told you just build it and see where it's too big and then cut it off and bring it downstairs.
Right.
This is what I did for your leg.
Let me move in closer. Alright, so this will be the top, and then the other piece will fit in.
This is a leg, and for the top, instead of cutting it square this time, just cut it at an angle there, and then we'll take this and then I'll weld this up and cut that off. It'll give it a nice finished edge for the top of the rack.
Very nice.
Better idea when
yeah, that's going to be awesome. Now you have to redo every other rack in the fish room to match.
Yeah. To be slightly different so it annoys someone with OCD.
Like our daughters.
So up next is really just refining all of the cuts, prepping all of the materials, making sure that everything is measured properly and is ready for the actual fabrication part to begin. There's a lot of prep that goes into working with metal, but I think we can all agree that the end result is absolutely gorgeous. Now, I'm going to break this into a couple different parts because, as you noticed, it's gotten quite long, but I thought that the information that Chris shared with us was too valuable to not include. So stay tuned for the next installment of this series, which will be the actual fabrication and possibly the installation as well. As always, thank you guys so much for your continued support, and a huge thank you to my husband, Chris. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the fact that he is willing to give up so much of his time, especially after working a very demanding job, to make these things for me to improve my quality of life in the fish room. Stay tuned for the next in the series, and don't forget to clean up your workspace.